God presented an answer to the leprosy for Naaman, and God has presented an answer to our conditions in life. It's called deliverance from sin. Deliverance from the condition of our life. Deliverance from the things that consume us, that overtake us, that just eat our condition of life. Now, the other thing I want to find is this passage about Naaman. Now, let me set this up, because it's hard to see if you just read it. Let's see. Verse 9. This is where the picture begins. Then Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elijah's house. He's the second in command, second most important person in the entire world. He brought everything that he had with him. All his horses, all the men, everything that was there. They were watching the commander, and he went to the house, stood before the house, and implied that he demanded to be healed. It was his right. And the messenger, the prophet, didn't even show up. In fact, he sent a messenger, and he told him something. Now, let me give you another phrase that will help you understand why Naaman got so mad. Basically, what the messenger said was, go jump in the lake. And Naaman was furious over this. Here was a man of stature being told to go jump in the lake. Here was a man that could command armies being told, go jump in the lake. And he turned and left, mad. I suspect he wanted to destroy another country or something else to prove how good he was. How would you like to have been the servant? Come up and say, and I like the servant's response. If he told you to do something mysterious and grand, would you not do that in order to be healed? And he said, sure. He said, then why not in this simple thing? Why not in this simple thing? Now, friends, the problem with us is our lives become so complex that we forget, and let me say this carefully, we forget the power of the cross of Jesus Christ. It has become an emblem for us. It's become something we wear around our neck, but we've become so accustomed to it that we think our plight in life can't be touched by the cross. So we try to do it ourselves. Oftentimes we try to do it ourselves by going to church a number of times. I grew up in the era when you could tell the really holy ones because they had those pins. Some of you remember that. I had missed church in 35 years. Y'all remember those pins? They had like a 5-year pin, a 10-year pin, a 15-year pin, and they just went on. Now, if you were out somewhere visiting, you had to get the pastor there to sign a note that you were attending Sunday school at church. And they gave you this pin. And the holier ones had the bigger numbers, right? I suspect that when they got to heaven and no one asked to see their pin, they were a little bit upset over that. You see, sometimes we get so complicated in what we're doing that we forget the simple thing. I was reminded of a story of a revival. The pastor was preaching, and there was a gentleman, a very distinguished looking gentleman, sitting on the back row. And on the second night of the revival, this gentleman walked down very elegantly, walked up to the evangelist. He said, I think it's time that the church acknowledge my presence and I become a member of the church. And the revivalist was telling the story. He said, before you can do that, you're going to have to lay face down in Brother Jones's pigsty and say, I am filthy. The guy said, and walked out. Then the evangelist said, probably could have said that a little differently, I think. And he worried about it, but the next night the guy was back working. Didn't move. The next night he was on the back row again. Didn't move. And on the last night, he came forward again to an invitation. And the evangelist asked him a question. He said, why have you come forward? He said, I need a witness. He said, what do you mean? He said, I'm ready to go lay down in Brother Jones's pigsty and say I'm a filthy person because I think I need Jesus more than anything else in the world. And no one would believe it. I need a witness. And he said this. He said, you don't need to do that. But you need to be willing to do it. What are you willing to do in order to be right with God? What are you willing to do in order to please God in all things? What are you willing to do in order to respond to what God has asked you to do? What are you willing to do? If thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in thine heart that God raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved and restored. God says he can cleanse you from all unrighteousness. What would you be willing to do? What would you be willing to do? Now, I want us to look at the other side. It's the commitment to this. I come from a heritage of storytellers, not liars. Well, we did that too. That's part of our Texas heritage. But I came from a heritage of people sitting around in the evening of work and so forth and just telling different stories. So let me tell you a story. We were traveling through the family and I were traveling through Arkansas. The western side of Arkansas is mountains, beautiful part of the country. Highway 7 is one of the most breathtaking highways. And if you're going to drive down it, take your time, give yourself the whole day because it just winds around. You can't get in a hurry. No 70-mile-an-hour speed limits out there. There's some of them like 15 going around the curve. And it was one of those long days. Been driving for some time, and I was tired anyway. And I saw this sign about some pull-off up there. And I said, let's stop, see if they've got a cup of coffee or something. So we got to the top, noticed some cars over there that were just parked in the wrong spot. So I got out and got to look at, and there was a guy out there that had this funny looking thing. It was a big wing, is what it was. Now this thing just amazed me. It was made out of aluminum and had some sort of plastic or something stretched all over. It had to be about 12 foot long on both sides. And he had this thing strapped to his back. He was sitting on the edge of this cliff. And I looked down, and it was a long way down there. And I said, what are you doing? There was a crowd around there. I was the only one who spoke to the guy. Everybody else thought he was nuts. I thought he was intriguing. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm fixing to jump off this thing. And I said, why? He said, you see that speck down there? I said, the one that's moving? He said, yeah, that's my brother-in-law in a pickup. He's going to pick me up in a little bit. And I thought, tell me about this. So he began to explain to me all of the integral designs of this wing. I forget what he called it, but evidently when it was moving, he had to get enough momentum going. The wind was blowing right. There was a lift on the wing, there was a weight ratio. I'm not sure I wanted to do it, but anyway, he told me about all this stuff and that you gently floated around in circles and how wonderful it was to float and see the things that are going on, and you just landed gently down there, hopefully. Now, I want you to know, in about 15 or 20 minutes, I learned a lot about flying. I really did. And all of a sudden, he was talking to me, and I was curious about how you knew when to get off. I mean, when to jump. First of all, it was taking about 8 or 9 guys to help me get off that thing. I don't know what I'm talking about. They'd taken that many at least to throw me off that cliff, screaming and hollering at the same time. And he had a piece of string hanging out in front of him. He said, now when the wind is right, that string will go like this. He said, that's not windy. That was simple enough, wasn't it? While we were talking, that string went like that. He said, I gotta go. He stood up, ran towards the cliff. Now, at that point, he and I were fairly even on our understanding of that wing. He and I knew a lot about dynamics of flight. He and I knew the theory behind gliding. But about 3 steps off the side of that cliff, there was only one of us committed to that wing. And it wasn't me. Now I want to talk to you about commitment.